Hello and welcome back to Genesis Designs and Modelcraft, and welcome back to more modelling for beginners with this Airfix P-51 Mustang. So here we are after the X22. It's had a few days to dry, several days actually, and after it had been drying for a few days I got my trusty Trizact and I went over the thing and just gave it a light rub down. Not a lot, just enough to take any little sort of bits and pieces out of the finish, make it nice and smooth so there aren't particles trapped underneath the decals. Now, the reason I'm flicking it around here like this is to show you that this is not a dazzling gloss finish. Hopefully you can see, yes, it is glossy for sure, but it's not a glass-like lose yourself in it deep gloss finish, and it does not need to be. Okay, so the whole should I gloss coat before decals question is not going to be addressed here, other than to say yes you should. But it does not need to be a liquid look high gloss finish. What you need is a smooth finish. Okay, there's a difference. A smooth finish will by its very nature appear glossy, especially at some angles. If you get these wings at just the right angle like that, you can see all the reflections, and yet it's not actually glossy. So you see what I'm getting at. This is perfectly smooth, but it is not a deep rich gloss. Okay, and this is plenty good enough for putting decals on. Now when I flipped it over, you'll have noted that indeed the first decal is already on, and that's because I like to pop one on before I start videoing and just see which solvents are going to work the best. All decals are different. Airfix decals, for this kit at least, and for many of the others, are supplied by Cartograph, so they are of very good quality, and there are no issues in that respect. But as I say, all decals are different in the way that they react to decal solvents and in the decal solvents that work best with them. Some decals require very little help, are very thin and will settle down without a lot of help at all, so just a little bit of a set solution is probably all you need with some. Airfix ones, they're not unique in this. I find a lot of more modern decals behave this way. They're not super duper thin, they certainly aren't thick, they're not thick enough to be an issue by any means, but they're a little bit thicker than some, and they have a particular resistance to quite a lot of the decal solvents that are around. So you need to find a sort of a set that works for each particular situation, and what I'm going to use going forward here is my Tamiya Mark Fit Strong, and this I'm going to use as the setting solution. So for those that don't know, decal solutions tends to be called something along the lines of set and sol, and they do two different jobs. The setting agent is the first one that you apply, and you apply that to the kit surface before you put the decal on, and you put the decal onto it, and it is there to help the decal adhere to the surface, and in most cases that's pretty much all it will do. Some decal setting solutions will actually soften the decal a little bit as well, and in some cases, particularly with very thin decals, a setting solution will probably suffice and there'll be no need for a solvent. So that's what the setting solution does, and that's what Tamiya Mark Fit is. They do a Mark Fit, here it is, and a Mark Fit Strong. I'm not entirely sure if these are widely available in the UK or not yet, but you can get them off eBay and places like that. So that's fine. I tend to default to the Strong most of the time, but a decal setting solution, that's all it's there to do, is to help fix the decal in place and get it to set down onto the surface of the model nicely. The second step in the decal fitting process is, where necessary, to use a solvent, and these are usually called something along the line of a fix or a sol, and in this case I'm going to use the Ammo of MIG Decal Fix, and Ammo actually label them for you so there's no confusion. The set is labelled number 1, Decal Fix is labelled number 2, and these are quite different from the fixing solution, the the setting solution. You see how confusing this gets, because everybody has to call them something. They can't all use the same words, so it all gets mixed up. So that's kind of why I'm explaining this, because obviously in the VMS look you've got set and fix, and then you've got softener. So this is the first one and this is the second one, so this is how it, yeah, anyway. So the solvent, this one will soften the decal. So the decal's already on, you've already removed the water and everything from underneath, and it's sat there. But in some cases you might need it to conform to a complicated surface, or it might be a little bit thicker, as these Airfix ones are, and you need to get it into the panel lines and the surface detail. So you use a decal softener to do that. And this is just, it's basically just a chemical, it's a certain type of compound which will literally soften the decal, so it becomes more malleable, and it makes it easier, or indeed possible, for the modeller to tease it into position, to get it to go around curves and to go into recesses and hollows, and indeed surface detail. You do need to be careful with decal softeners and solvents in general, because they have a habit of actually attacking the paint surface as well. This one very much will, if you're using sort of acrylics and things like I do regularly, routinely, like we all do, this will take it straight off. So even though you've cleared your paint finish, you do need to be careful with decal solvents. So please, if you're not sure how a particular solvent's going to react or work on your model, test it. Don't test it by fitting a decal and then ruining the paintwork around the decal, because that's going to cause a lot of swearing and remedial work and possibly unfinished models. So be careful and test. Get used to the system you're using and what you need to do to mitigate any possible damaging effects. And with all that said, let's put a decal or two on here to demonstrate for you how I go about doing it. So I'm not going to sit here and say this is the only way to fit decals, but I will show you how I do it. So utilise your artwork from the kit or the decal set or whatever you're using to familiarise yourself with where things go, but keep it to hand. Airfix decals and their artwork are really good actually. They're very good with the panel lines, and the sizes of decals and things generally match up pretty well, so it makes it easier when it comes to placement. So get yourself happy with that. Then you need a source of water. This is mine. It's an old pickles jar from Spain. Love these things. Haven't had any in years actually. I should probably go to Spain just to get some more. But as you can see, I've been using it a while because of something I tend to do. It's a bit childish, I suppose, but it's put a decal from the sheet on there. Right, I use the lid as my soaking surface, so I'll stick that there. My tweezers, and this is the wing marking, so we'll go with that first. So use the tweezers and dip that in the water. Don't let go of it, don't let it float. It's not the end of the world if you drop it, but just dip it in there for a few seconds and then pop it on the lid to soak. You need the water to do its thing, soak through the backing paper. Some cotton buds, clean ones preferably. And the fixing agent you intend to use, if any. This needs to be left to soak for as long as it takes to release from the backing paper, and I test that by periodically prodding it with my finger, and as you can see, this has got to the point where it's moving freely, so we're good to go. So I'm now going to take my We'll settle on setting solution. Time we are good enough to include a brush, and I'm going to place that on the surface of the model where that decal needs to go. And this being a largish one, I'm going to slide it onto the model straight off the backing sheet rather than grabbing it with my tweezers, and I'll do that like so. Note that I pull the backing out from under it rather than pulling the decal off. That it might help in preventing sort of wrinkling and such. Now, consult the diagram to make sure I'm happy with where I want it to go, and I'm just going to manipulate it on the surface of the model until I'm happy with its position. Which I think that'll do. Now, I'll zoom in. Okay, you can see there's a lot of water hanging about, and the decal really does look like it's just floating on the surface. It doesn't look integrated at all, does it? So the first step in getting it to look integrated is to remove all that excess moisture. So starting in the middle-ish, press it down just gently with the cotton bud, and then equally gently roll cotton bud towards the edge of the decal. And work your way around. And what you're doing is expelling the moisture from beneath the decal. And the cotton bud will just soak it all up as it gets to the edge. And by using a rolling motion rather than sort of just scooting across, you're very much less likely to move the decal once it's in place. There we go. That's now removed the majority of the moisture from underneath. So now, because I know it's fairly well in position, I can just fairly safely rub the cotton bud across the whole thing, just to make sure everything's gone. Okay, now it still doesn't look really like it's very combined with the surface. You can just start to see the panel lines a little bit there, and in truth, if you left it like this, it would sink down into the detail a little bit, but not all the way. But you can also see that just here, because of this detail, there's a big lump, and it doesn't really want to do what it's told there. It won't really sit down over that without some help, and that's a perfect opportunity to bring the solvent into play. Now, Ammo are also kind enough to provide a brush in the lid of their product. A really delicate one. So I'm going to put the solvent on top of the decal. As I say, be careful with too much of this getting all over the paintwork. And I'm going to pay particular attention to getting the product in this area here. There's a little bit underneath it, and there's some on top of it. Now on some decals and with some solvents, you'll get a very exciting pickling happening. The decal will kind of almost shrivel up. Don't panic, it's supposed to do that, and a lot of instructions will tell you to just leave it well enough alone and let it do its thing and walk away. I'm not going to do that because I need this decal to conform to the detail here. Now I'm going to change the angle so that I can work on it a bit more easily. There we go. You can see a little bit of the wrinkling effect is happening there. And what I'm going to do is carefully, gently but not too gently, I'm going back in with this rolling motion across the rest of the decal, and hopefully you can see that it's starting to just drop into those panel lines a little bit more now. Panel lines and rivets. And over here, I'm going to poke it. Just gently at first, pressing it down. Once it looks like it's starting to conform, let's get in there. And press it down from all angles, and now you can see, hopefully, yeah, that decal has conformed quite happily around that raised detail. You can see that the panel lines are starting to be more apparent. And now when it dries, the whole thing's going to just suck down into the surface of the model a lot more readily, so that you'll end up with something like this. I'm really not sure if that's focusing or not, where the panel lines are properly visible across the decal, and it looks almost like it's painted on, which is what we want. Sometimes this process needs to be repeated a couple of times. Don't be afraid to do that. As I say, these Cartograph / Airfix decals seem to be really quite resistant to the solvents, to the point where this ammo stuff is virtually the only thing that I've found that will work on them. So don't be afraid to use multiple passes in those cases. But if your decal shrivels and pickles up very easily, be a little bit more cautious, because ultimately you can sort of melt and stretch the decal out of all recognition and just mess it up entirely. So please, please, please practice and test out the stuff you're going to use before you do it, to make sure that it's not going to kill your decals and it's not going to mark and ruin your paint surface. You join me a few days later and now have all of the main markings on, and they're nice and dry, and here they are. As you can see, these markings dropped beautifully into the little holes in the paintwork that I left for them, and everything now makes sense, I think, much as it ever will with this scheme, I suppose. Same this side. And if I bring you up real close, hopefully you can see how these decals are completely conforming with all of the surface detail. They still look somewhat separate at the moment because of the different gloss levels, but once this has all got a final finish on it, it will look good. Here by the sea, and you see that sort of weirdness around the sea. Can you see? By the sea. That is what happens when you get too much of something like this straight onto the paint. It's very minimally melted, kind of slightly shriveled. If that happens to you, please don't panic. Equally, if you see this happening, don't touch it. Don't wipe it, don't prod it, poke it, because you're liable to make it worse. Just leave it alone. This is nice and dry now, and all I will have to do to fix this, guess what I'm going to use? Good old Trizac. Just a little rub over, and I do, anyone who watched the mosquito video, and this will be kind of in the next few steps anyway, I always do just rub over the decals anyway. And all that will do, or what that will do for me, is just smooth down that area of slight, it's only very slight damage, but just smooths it down and blends it into the surface a little bit, so that when I overcoat this, whether it be with more X22 or straight to flat, haven't quite decided where I'm going with that yet, it renders it basically invisible. So that's all these decals, but unfortunately, as we all know, the Airfix decal designer does have a stencil fetish, and true to form, there are quite a few to choose from. So what I've done here is I've gone around the paint plan, this is the stencil data position drawing, and decided which ones I'm actually going to use. Now with this paint scheme, a lot of these stencils would have been painted over and not replaced, and that's actually clearly visible in some of the photographs. If I just pull up the black and white close-up, okay, here it is. It's hard for me to show it to you without getting the damn light on it, but if I zoom that, you can see the stencils here and here. See some muck around the flare port. I've been told that's the flare port. You can see that there's nothing here, and there should be according to the diagram, which is fine. And I can see that it looks like this one down here is fitted in this area that doesn't have the white stripe on it. I'm sorry, the light's reflecting, isn't it? So based on that information, you can see a little bit there. There's one that's sort of partially there. I've picked out all of the stencils which should, in theory, still be present in some form or another, and that basically amounts to this batch along the bottom on each side. So I'm going to fit those now, and just a little tiny tip for stencil decal cutting out. It can be a bit awkward to get to, and especially if you're not using them all and what have you. So what I tend to do, and especially with a good decal sheet like this, they are laid out quite well. So I tend to cut the sheet into strips, like so. Not necessarily single strips, but probably at least double strips of the decals, which just got to carefully navigate around that one. Makes them a lot easier to access for cutting out. Like so. I'm going to go along here as well. I'll leave it at that. And this just makes it much easier to take out the ones you want for whatever you're going to do, whether it be all of them or not, because unfortunately in most cases, and this is no exception, when I do stenciling, I tend to use, so I'll start with, say, let's say the left side, because that's what we're looking at, and I will apply all of these to the left side. And what would be nice is if John's watching this, maybe think about potentially having them numbered and placed on the decal sheet in such a way that they all are in the same place, instead of having to pick up your big sheet of tiny decals and you've got one from here, one from here, one from here, one from that. But it's irritating, and it would simplify the process somewhat if they were sequential per view. Small thing, I don't know if that would be a difficult thing to implement, but I think it would be better. Anyway, enough said. I'm going to fit the chosen stencils to my model. It will be done in exactly the same way I've already demonstrated, but I do tend to use less solvent on stencils because they're so tiny, they don't tend to need it. But it will otherwise be done in exactly the same way, and I'll join you again once those are in position. You join me now with all of the decals on the main model. There will be a few here and there that need to go on some of the other parts, notably the propeller and the drop tanks, but I'm not worried about that right now. I did not put many on in the end, but that's fine because I really don't like stencils that much. And what I have then done, as you can probably tell, is put another coat of the X22 on. It's a very light coat, I've only just done it, but it's pretty much dry to the touch now, as long as I don't press too hard. And because I've already got the sort of hardened clear coats underneath there and everything's been smoothed and sanded at every stage, you can see that there is a fairly high lustre about the finish at this point. Now, why do I put gloss over the decals? It's a very, very optional stage, truthfully. You don't really need to do it if you don't want to. The reason I'm doing it, or have done it, or generally do, to be fair, is really to protect the decals from subsequent weathering is one reason. I am going to do some weathering with chiefly enamel and oil based washes, and some decals can sometimes be a little bit affected by those, which clearly is not what you want. That's one reason. The other reason is when I come to put a matte coat on, which I'm going to have to do, one thing that surprised me as an aside, or a deviation, or another tandem, yet another tandem, she's off, wee, strap in, it's time for a dit. Sorry. One thing I've been quite surprised by, looking at the photos as I have throughout this, has been how shiny this thing actually was. I think we're all led to believe in the popular truth is that warplanes are very dull. In actual fact, quite often they're not. And this particular aircraft, as you'll have seen also in the photos, is quite glossy in some places. So, you know, despite that, this will have a matte coat put on anyway, to get back to the original point, which was the other reason for putting the gloss coat on. And that is for a uniform surface for the matte varnish. Sometimes when you have you've put your decals on and what have you, and then you put a flat coat over the model, and the decals still look different. And I believe it's because they take the paint in a slightly different way to the paint surrounding them. So substrates are important, as we know already. That's why we use primer and mess about, isn't it? So I think, and I have found it to be the case, that if you seal or overcoat the decals with the same gloss that they've been fitted onto, that sort of appearance difference that you get when you put the flat varnish on is less pronounced. So that's the second reason I've done it. It is X22 again, it is very, very thin again, but I think it's fairly obvious even at this stage that those decals already look like part of the finish. It is very bright, I admit, but they do look like part of the finish pretty much already. So once that's dry, I'll give the whole thing another flat down with Trizact and we'll get into some weathering. But it does need time to dry, as per the usual. And yet a third reason for doing it, and it is actually one of the reasons I've done it particularly around the nose area, is to attempt to help the decals to not come off under subsequent masking. So I need to mask just at the back of this Lou 4 logo here, this sort of upper triangle. I need a little piece of random colour in there. I've decided I'm going to repaint these cowl vents in a green colour because I just feel like that's more appropriate. And I've also decided to dispense with my very unwarlike red gun ports. Changed my mind again, I'm sorry. I'm a female, I'm allowed. I've looked obviously some more at the pictures for various reasons. And I don't know, red just doesn't seem all that viable to me, so I've decided I'm going to repaint over them in green, but not the same green as the rest of the green. So that I'm also going to do, although the decals aren't getting in the way for that. So I do have a little bit more painting to do, but this needs to dry for now. So what do we do while we're waiting for the model to dry? Well, I'll show you. I got the remaining pieces out of the box, the remaining sections of frames, and I've been through them, and I have carefully, is the box of painted parts there, I've been through what was left on the sprues and I've taken from them all of the rest of the parts that will be needed to finish the build. So what I'm going to do now, while the model sits in the spray booth there and gets nice and dry, is start to go through these parts, prepare them, get rid of all the sprue nubs and flash and mould seams and everything else, and start painting them. So what we've had, obviously there's the propeller, we've got the wheels from the Brass and set, main wheels there, main wheel covers and the tail wheel. Door struts, note that I've left these attached to the piece of frame that they came from. This can hold them for painting, just make everything a lot easier, because the area where the sprue attaches isn't really going to matter when it's cleaned off, so this is appropriate for this part. Same with the drop tank or bomb racks. Got the main undercarriage legs. This is the propeller hub spinner actually. You can't see it on the finished model, but it's included anyway. The underwing pitot. The aerial for the fuselage, that needs to be blue. A couple of parts that fit inside the canopy. There. And these are to do with the undercarriage doors. These are the drop tank sway braces, and of course the exhausts. All of these parts will just be prepped and painted as per the methods you've already seen throughout the rest of this video. The only exception will be the exhaust pieces. If I just sort of show you, these are not the best. The moulding's a bit shonky. So I'll clean these up, square them up, square up the ends of each exhaust stub, and then I'm going to drill into them, and I'll probably film that when I get to the point of putting the drilling in. I will probably film that just to show how it's done, although in truth it's fairly obvious that you simply, I say that a lot, don't I? Simply drill into the end of the exhaust stub without drilling your finger or breaking the exhaust stub, etc, etc. But I'll show you that when I get to it. And we'll look at these resin parts and how to sort of remove those from their casting stubs. And actually going through and doing this will take quite a long time, and we'll give the rest of the model plenty of time to get nice and dry, ready for the next stages. You join me a while later and most of these pieces are now prepared. No major issues, a few small points to note. The propeller assembly, I have glued this little spinner cap on. Quite a lot of sanding and cleaning up on here to get everything nice and smooth, including each blade tip, which had a weird sort of double sink mark thing going on. Needed a fair bit of sanding to sort it, but it is sorted now. That's that. The rest is fine. This is the canopy brace. It had some indented lightning hole detail, which I, as you can see, have drilled out. I did that by, I got one of my spatulas here, put a piece of tape on it, so this tape is upside down, sticky side up, and stuck it to the piece of tape, and that gave me, it sticks surprisingly well when you stick things like this, and that enabled me to get the holes drilled most of the way through, and then I just finished it off in my hand. The reason I did it that way is because, as you can see, there is not a lot of material left around the holes, and it would be very easy to break the part if you just did it freehand. And here is my drilled out exhaust. This is done. Here's one I have not yet drilled. Now I'm not going to be able to film this closely enough for you to be able to really see what I do here, so I'll do as best I can at this range. If I go any closer, I'm just going to end up working off camera, guaranteed. So this is, as you can see, an X-Acto or Exolite type handle, quite a well worn one, and in it is a needle which I've sanded the tip of to a sort of a round point. This has all been cleaned up and scraped until it's got rid of all the mould seams and stuff, and then I've test fitted them and trimmed this sort of mounting flange back until it fitted properly. And as part of the cleanup operation, I, with the scalpel, just sliced the end of each exhaust stub because they were quite rounded off and a little bit indistinct and just not very good really. So now I have a sharp, flat, straight edge on the back of each one of these stubs. So using my not quite pointed needle, I sort of try and find the centre-ish. You have to do it by eye and it is quite difficult. And I just poke it in to give, this is just to give the drill something. To start the drill basically. Some may find it easier to do this if they put a coat of paint or something on, just to give the part a bit of relief, because it's this pale grey is difficult to really see. So I've just made a fairly decent indent in the back there. If you can get them in the middle, brilliant. If they're not quite in the middle, don't panic too much. There you go. So now I have a starter. For the drill, this is a 0.6mm drill bit. And now because I've got that starter there, it's relatively easy to locate the drill in there and then just drill into the stub. No need to go in very far to give the impression of a bit of depth, but the issue here is, to be honest, the stubs aren't round, so the back faces aren't round, so it's not possible, no matter what you do, to drill a hole that will look completely sort of central to the stub, because the stub just isn't round. My feeling is it probably still looks a bit better to have something like a hole in there than not to have any at all. Your mileage may vary. Some might wish to actually purchase aftermarket exhausts and save themselves the bother, but here's what it can look like. Done. And then I was moving on to, you know, the wheels, the main undercarriage legs actually. Picked them up to clean up the seam lines and such on there. Here's the one that I haven't done yet. And decided to test fit the wheels, and there I have found an issue. And unfortunately it's an issue that is probably going to put a lot of people off using these Brassin wheels, and that is the reason that I'm going to detail it now. Here is an Airfix wheel as it comes. As you can see, it's intensely bald in the middle, and that seam will need cleaning up, and all of this tread pattern would need to be put in by you, the modeller, using actually the exact same scribing and possibly razor sawing technique that I used on the seat back cushion. It does work perfectly well for these situations, but it is very time consuming. It's certainly possible. And here's the rest of the detail. There is some, but it's quite soft. And this is designed to fit the landing gear leg in a very specific manner. As you can see, there's an offset sort of keyway on that hub. This forms the inner hub. Focus please, there we go. And that keys into the slot there, presses in, and when you press it in properly, as you can hear, it goes in quite tightly because the hub is slightly tapered, and that sits into position like so. The idea of that keyway is that this flattish area that's moulded in will then end up being where the tyre sits on the ground. Fast forward to the Brassin wheel, and as you can see, the reverse side of the Brassin resin wheel already has a hub. So clearly that interface isn't going to work with that wheel, and this is the set for the Airfix kit. Alright, so I look at the instructions, and basically the instructions are suggesting that what we need to do is remove all the hub detail and butt joint the leg to the wheel. and that's the only detail that's given. I wouldn't recommend that, honestly. I don't think the wheels will stay in place very long, and it would be very difficult to align everything, yada yada yada. So to me, the solution, if you still wish to use these wheels, is to create an axle ourselves, which I've not done yet. I'm in the process of sorting it out. So the first thing I did was drill out this central hole a little bit, and this is a 0.9mm drill bit. So I've drilled this out here to a reasonable depth. We can go all the way in because there is a moulding there to do it. Drilled that through. It's important, obviously, to really try and have that drill bit as straight as possible in every axis. The 0.9mm hole will fit a piece of 0.9mm brass tubing, thus, and this isn't all that strong. You can very easily bend this, but it will be strong enough to provide the locking necessary to get the wheel in position. Then on the landing gear leg, what I've done initially is cut off the admittedly very indistinctly moulded, come on camera, the detail on the back there of the axle area. Cut that away again, and just like the exhaust, to give a flat area to work with. And I plan to drill through this hub now, all the way through everything that's here. And I'm doing it now for the same reasons as with this canopy arch, because there's not going to be a massive amount of plastic left around the hole. So if I try to do it later with the less support, I'm more likely to actually damage the kit part beyond redemption. And that's the issue here. If I'm selling this as a build somewhat for beginners to intermediate modelers, this is starting to get into the territory of being quite tricksy. Without trying to big myself up, this is requiring a deft touch to pull it off. So I am going to carry on and do it because I think the kit wheel is truly terrible. But I think if any of you watching have bought the brass and wheels and look at this and don't feel confident, then I would suggest to you that you don't try to do this. Because if you wreck your undercarriage leg, you've got no real recourse except to try and get Airfix to send you some more. But as I say, I'm going to go ahead and do it, and I'll show you the results. The other issue is, having done this whole assembly is going to be quite fragile. So, you know, care and what have you with displaying and everything else is going to be a thing. Well, I did it. Thank goodness. Right, I got away with it. So I managed to drill through. And as you can see, there really isn't a lot of meat around there. And having drilled through it, I then proceeded to carve down the material around that leg, the axle. So that hub was all, I snipped the worst of it off with the nippers, just like so, and then carved it down with the scalpel blade. And now my piece of 0.9 brass tubing fits through there, no problem at all. As is often the case with things like this, the drill with this plastic is so soft as well. The drill sort of stretches the hole a little bit, so it's a bit sloppy, but I'm not too worried because the glue will make up the difference. And there you go. That does now slot together. So I just need to figure out, mark off the length here. I'll cut that and then glue it into the leg. And then to finish the job, once everything is cut to length and sorted, so we'll end up with a nice little axle like that. This is some 0.5mm brass wire, and that feeds inside this 0.9 tube quite nicely, thank you. And that will stiffen it up dramatically. So once it's all cut to length and installed, I can then install a piece of this 0.5mm wire inside and again glue it, and that will stiffen up the piece of tube dramatically. But the weak point honestly is always going to be the fact that there's very little meat left where the tube's actually gluing into. So as I say, this is going to be a touch on the fragile side, so please bear that in mind. If you've already bought the brassing wheels, because I did, and you're looking at this thinking I'm very sorry. Actually I'll have a quick look on Hannah's and see if there are any alternatives that will actually just fit directly on. I don't believe there are. Yeah, no, had a quick look, doesn't look like it. All the aftermarket wheels are just designed to work on an axle like a normal kit interface is. So this isn't the only option to fit these wheels. Obviously you could just butt joint them as the instructions suggest. You could pin them very moderately rather than going all the way through, just maybe using some 0.5, or you could try to carve all this hub assembly away in such a way as to leave yourself with a bit of an axle. There are ways and means of doing it. This is the way I've chosen to do it, possibly overcomplicated, but I've managed to make it work on this one at least. As I say, I'm really sorry if people have bought that and think no, I'm not going with that, then I apologise. I can relax now, take a deep breath. I have successfully converted both of my undercarriage legs to the more standard kind, so I now have two normal legs with axles and the wheels slot straight on. So that's that, and I did say I was going to show you how I remove the resin casting block, and it really is as simple in this case anyway as using the nippers. Tamiya nippers have got those nice fine blades, you can slip them in there and just gently boop, off it comes, and that resin chunk can go straight in the bin. And then I clean it up with the scalpels. This is meant to have a flat spot, so I'll just trim that off, paying great attention to trying to keep my blade flat. And then with the other one I made this flat spot a little bit bigger, just extend it out a touch, trim. And when I do this, I like to try and get them both roughly the same, and the way I do that is by putting them together and making sure the flat spots match basically. It's almost there, it needs to be a little bit bigger yet. There we go. Just eyeball it, make sure it's sort of level and actually flat. When you're trimming with the blade you tend to end up scooping it out more in the middle. And to finish, get the sanding board and just a couple of light passes to ensure that it is actually flat. And that's that done. Minimal creation of dust, minimal hassle, and then as ever just tidy up with a scalpel, and that is that wheel prepped. So I am now in a position where all of my supplementary parts are prepped and ready to go. Here we are then with most of the smaller parts base painted. There will be more work to come on these, but what I've done is just gone around and got the basic colours on everything. Here's the propeller. Obviously not worried about this hub, should probably be silver, but I'm not remotely worried about it because it will be entirely invisible when it's fitted into the spinner. So this needs to have decals added and flat coat and this and that and the other and whatnot. Here we've got the insides of all of the undercarriage doors plus the wheel hubs. As you can see, I've attached these to some sticky side up masking tape and then just sprayed them. And all of these silver parts have been sprayed with Tamiya LP11. This is the lacquer paint and it's literally just silver. And it's ideal actually for things like this because this is the finish as it comes out. It's just a nice satin sheen. It's not too glossy, it's not too matte, it's spot on. So that colour is on everything here apart from the bomb racks, which these were done in the same colour as the main natural metal finish. The rest of it's all LP11. The wheels, again LP11, and I've hand painted the tyre with the XF85. Now, hand painting or brush painting Tamiya acrylics can be a bit tricksy. If you try to paint them as they come, what they'll do where you go over them with the brush, even while it's still wet, it kind of pulls up the paint from underneath and makes a horrible mess, and they're really not that easy to use. But this is thinned for airbrush use, so this has got Mr. Colour Thinner in it, which somehow magically makes it able to be brush painted if you're careful. So those have been brush painted. The hub detail is crisp enough so that with the use of a fine pointed brush, it was in fact this one, a 4-0, I was able to outline the hub quite happily and then fill the rest of the tyre in with a slightly bigger brush. The aerial is blue and the exhausts have an initial coat of colour on them, and this is again, it's brush painted, and this is Mr. Metal Colour Stainless. And this stuff, there's a range of these. This is the older style label. And these are utterly fantastic. They're ridiculously expensive. They're about £3 a jar. But for brush painting stuff like this stuff is unbeatable. It's absolutely fabulous. So that's just a basic brushed on coat of stainless just on there for now. Undercarriage legs, LP11. And the canopy parts are done in XF85. And as I say, that's all just basic colours, and all of these parts pretty much will have some extra work done to them before the end. I have not yet painted the very, very small parts. I will probably brush paint these when they're in situ because there's no real way to hold them while you airbrush them. So that's all the smaller parts, and if I just put these to the side. The rest of the model can make a reappearance, and here it is. As you can see, I have, as I said, picked out the gun covers, or the gun barrel area, in a green colour. This is just normal olive drab, which shows you just how much darker my other olive drab is. There's the little blue triangle next to the script there, and I've repainted those cowling panels in olive drab as well. As much as I liked my party gun barrels in red, I do think these look a little bit more believable in green. I've gone all the way back to the ID stripes on this side, and on this side I've got an untidy freehand edge because on my photo that's how it looks to me. And I have, as I said, used Trizac with water and again rubbed the whole model down again, gone over all the decals, so I've got a uniform smooth finish. And as you can see, it's pretty glossy as well, but it's glossy in a way that you can work with it. And the next step from here then is to start with some weathering, and I'm going to make a start on that in the next episode because we've got enough here already for this one. As always, thank you so much for watching, and thank you ever so much for all the lovely comments that you keep putting on the videos. There's still time to jump aboard if you fancy it. Vince at www.modelsforsale.com does still have a good stock of these Airfix P-51Ds at $19.99, which is a very, very good price. They are still available. And with all of that said, I think it only remains for me to say, until next time, look after yourselves, look after each other, and Genesis out.